Welcome to this of Agile Sur, co-hosted with Codurance. So Agile Sur is a community based on the south of Spain, based on Andalusia. The main goal is to start creating topic that is going to attract not only people from the management side, also people from the craftsmanship um, communities. But we are not only talking about technical practices. So we are also focusing having some kind of discussion about product design, vertical slicing, and so on. So if you want to be updated of the upcoming events we are going to have we have a schedule for the future. You can just start following our account in Twitter and just put in there the link, or you just can subscribe to our meetup page. And now regarding Codurance, I'm also a member. I'm an employee from Codurance, so I'm so excited about combining the community that I belong and also the company that I'm working for. I'm so happy to have events like this. So only just remarking one thing. In Codurance, we are hiring people, and here just having a remote position is totally is possible. So as I mentioned before, I'm based in Andalusia, and the office is based on Barcelona. So the headquarters is there. So I have no intention to go there. Sorry for my colleagues that are living there. But what I trying to say is here, just working from home is a possibility. It's a real possibility. There is nothing weird about having to go 3 days to the office or 2 days per week. You can just work remotely from home forever. So that's we are hiring people. Our main goal for the next year is to increase the number of employees we currently have as a company. So then I'm going just to put here the link to our careers page. And if you have any questions, you can just follow me on Twitter. My inbox is always open, and you can ask to me as many questions as you need. And regarding the event we are going to have today, we have Lucy here. It's going to be our first English event. Let's see how it is going on, because this is a Spanish community, but probably it's going to be fine. Why not? Why not? Yeah. Um, I have the pleasure of working with Lucy since I joined the company. 1 week after joining the company, I was sent to a project with her. She started as a product designer, and now she's become an agile delivery manager. What I love from Lucy is his way of his lean mindset. And for sure, she's going just to provide to us. She's going to give to us a very nice speech about product design, agile way of working, and so on. And now it's time. It's time for Lucy. So all yours, Lucy. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jesus. Thanks for the very nice introduction. So let me just share my screen and then we will get started. So welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be doing the first English talk at the Agile Sur community. Let's see if it's a success. I hope so. So today I would like to talk to you about Agile product development in practice. So it's just kind of a fundamentals guide to what is Agile product development. So hopefully you can learn a little bit about it and how you can maybe implement it at the place where you work. So agility, or the ability to respond to change in your market, is often considered one of the most significant predictors of your company's success. So obviously that's quite huge. And as you can see here from the statistics on this page, Agile projects are far more likely to succeed when we compare it to Waterfall projects, which are the more kind of traditional style of product development. And in fact, Waterfall projects, the traditional style, are 3 times more likely to fail when compared to Agile projects. So obviously there's something good going on with Agile. But what is Agile? Agile is something that gets thrown around a lot. A lot of companies claim to be Agile and sort of use it as a buzzword. But what exactly is it? Is it walls full of Post-it notes? Is it some sort of fancy product management software? Or is it something that you can only learn from specialized consultants? So in this talk, I'm hoping to demystify it. And we'll talk about the basics of an Agile product development journey, so that hopefully you can all learn something from that today. So before we look at Agile, let's take a look at Waterfall to see where we've come from. So as I said, Waterfall is the more traditional style of product development. Basically, when you start Waterfall, you have a planning phase. And what you want to do here is you want to plan the entire product, absolutely everything that will be in the product, all the bells and whistles, everything. And this planning can take weeks, months, if not occasionally years. Once the entire product is planned, then you can move through the next stages. So you can do the designs. We design how the entire product will look. We get into the building, the development, before finally launching the finished end product to market. But the problem here is that we've launched something to market that, potentially months, if not years, after we started planning. So in that time, the market demand might have shifted. Other technologies might have become available, making our product obsolete. And basically, multiple things have changed, meaning that we're now launching a product that has no market fit. So it's a waste of resources and a waste of time. But if we compare that to Agile, what Agile does is it takes the Waterfall process and it basically breaks it down into smaller kind of bite-sized chunks. So instead of planning the entire product, what we do is we just plan a tiny, tiny part of the product, maybe just a few features or a few screens of the product. And then we go through the process of design and development and launching. And we end up launching those few features that we originally planned. And this is called an incremental release. So, and once we've released this incremental release, which is, usable software that we can send to our user that they can engage with, then we start the process again. So we're planning the next small set of features, and we just plan enough to get started, and we design and we develop those, and then we launch the next small set of features. And we continue this cycle. So this cycle of kind of planning to launching is often referred to as a sprint, and normally takes around 2 weeks to go through this cycle from planning to launching. So it's very, very quick. And we're always just doing enough to get to the next release. And we repeat these sprints, always releasing just a little bit until finally the product is complete. Or, some products are never really complete. Sometimes you're just always doing sprints. But the point is you're always adding just little bits. So the benefits of Agile compared to Waterfall is one, that the process is flexible. So because we're doing such small releases and giving small parts of the product to our users, we're able to quickly gather user feedbacks on our shipped features. And this gives us continuous testing. And this continuous testing allows us to respond quickly to new and changing requirements in the market or in our user needs. And as a result, we can update our near-term roadmap to make sure that we're meeting the customer needs, meaning that ultimately, in the end, we are far more likely to be delivering a product that our users love. So what exactly is Agile? So Agile is based on the 12 Agile Principles, as you can see here. But for the sake of keeping this talk short, what I've done is I've just pulled out 4 Agile Principles that I think if you're kind of new to Agile, these are kind of key to keep in mind as you're starting your product development journey. So the first is that you should always be reflecting and adjusting. So you and your team should be reflecting on your work processes, your product, making adjustments in order to be more effective and to reach your targets. You should also always be aiming to satisfy your customer. And you satisfy your customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. You should be aiming to deliver this software to your user frequently, ideally maybe every few weeks, but maybe every couple of months also, that's fine. And finally, teams in Agile should be self-organizing. The idea is that we trust that the teams know their strengths, their weaknesses, and if they can organize themselves, they'll achieve the best result. So as we've just seen there, Agile is actually a set of values and principles. So they're kind of more like guiding beliefs that can be used to help you make decisions when you're developing products. So around the kind of Agile world, you've probably heard terms like Scrum, Kanban, XP, things like this. So what these are popular Agile methodologies. These are product development frameworks that you and your team can follow that were created with the Agile principles in mind. However, although these can help your team into doing Agile, just following an Agile methodology doesn't necessarily make your team Agile. These methodologies are only truly Agile if it helps your team achieve those Agile principles that we've just looked at. So in fact, you don't even need to follow a particular methodology strictly in order to achieve Agile. You can make changes and you can update processes based on whatever helps your team achieve the Agile principles best. So for example, let's say you're following Scrum, and in Scrum, they recommend having a daily stand-up meeting where you kind of physically stand up. And maybe with your team, for whatever reason, that just doesn't work out, and you find that your team is more productive sitting down, having a traditional long meeting. That's fine. As long as your team are making product decisions that are in line with the Agile principles, you can make any changes you want. So with that in mind, there's all these different methodologies out there. In this talk, I won't be focusing too much on any particular methodology. I'll just be sort of guiding you through what is a sort of typical or generic Agile product development process and the kind of stages along that journey. So, who is in an Agile product development team? Well, first we have the actual development team, the people building the product. These are self-organizing and cross-functional, which basically means that it's made up of different people from different expertise and background working together to reach a common goal. And it's often made up of skills such as design, development, testing, delivery. And often in this team, people will wear a few different hats. Maybe one day they're doing testing and the next day they're doing development. We next have the product owner. This is the person whose job it is to maximize the value of the product created by the development team. So it's an internal facing role. And what they do is they gather all the technical requirements, they groom the product backlog, and they detail the user stories. We'll talk more about the backlog and user stories later to hopefully add a bit more detail there. And then finally, we have our stakeholders. So stakeholders are basically anyone that's affected by the development of the software product. This can be your end users, but it can also be, for example, executives in your company or even other departments in your company. It's basically anyone who is affected by the product we're building. So before we go into starting Agile product development journey, I just want to touch on this Agile principle here, which is satisfying our customer. So the only way that we can satisfy our customer is by understanding who they are and what they need. And the only way we can understand them is by consistently communicating with them. So in Agile product development, you and your team need to be consistently communicating with users. So usually this is a job for the UX professional in your team, if you have one, but really all members of the team should be encouraged to regularly talk to users. And there's a number of different kind of communication methods you can do. You can interview current users if you have them. You can interview potential users about their experience with competitor products. Or as you're shipping these small features, you can allow users to test them out and give you direct feedback. And through all of this user communication, what we're aiming to do is discover the user needs. So what do they need from your product? What are they looking for? What's going to make them feel satisfied? So for example, maybe if you were looking at a shopping website, my user need might be to be able to quickly and confidently compare products without leaving the comfort of my sofa. So that could be a need that your product could help me satisfy. Keep in mind that not all users know exactly what they need, even though they may say they do. There's the famous quote, which was attributed to Henry Ford, where he says, "If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." So with that in mind, it's your job to kind of look below what they say they need and see if you can identify the core needs and, collect this information and share it with your team. Okay. Let's get started. So that's the intro out the way. So let's actually, let's pretend that we've joined a new company. We're developing a new product. We're going to do it in an agile way. We're starting from scratch. What are the stages we need to do? Where do we actually begin, and when do we start getting into the sprints? So to start off with, there'll be a series of planning meetings just to get us started before we can even get into the sprints. So the first planning meeting might be the product strategy meeting. The goal of the product strategy meeting is to define a clear business need that your project is addressing. Or in other words, what is the end goal of this Agile project and how will you achieve it? So at this point, we want to keep this strategy very high level. It's got to be big enough that it kind of covers the big picture, but it also needs to be realistic. And remember, because Agile projects are very flexible and they're prone to change. So by keeping this product strategy very high level, it means that we won't need to change it. Well, we won't need to change, hopefully we won't need to change it that much, if at all. But why do we make a product strategy? Well, 70% of businesses refer to the product strategy whenever they're making major decisions. And the development team, who in the day-to-day building of the product, can sometimes lose sight of the overarching purpose behind their work. And having the product strategy to refer to see what they're aiming towards, to see what the end goal of the project is, something that can clarify what the purpose is and help them make decisions. And the same for the business. So it sort of functions as a kind of a guide or a kind of North Star, just to make sure that the business and the development team are making decisions and that they're on the right track. So in this product strategy meeting, you're going to want the product owner who is responsible for creating the product strategy. You'll also want the stakeholders in your company just to ensure that there's buy-in and alignment. And optional, but I would recommend having some key members of the product team with you too. Just so everyone's kind of involved in the creation of the strategy and knows where we're heading. So once we've got our product strategy, then we want to move on to the next planning meeting. Oh, sorry, no, we don't. We want to talk about how we create our product strategy. I got ahead of myself there. So yeah, how do we actually create our product strategy? So there's a number of canvas and planning tools that you could use to help you create them. There really is no wrong way. It's whatever works for you and your business. One that I'm sharing here is called the elevator pitch method, and it's quite a beginner-friendly template to use when you're coming up with a product strategy. And the idea is that you fill in the blanks. So you say for and your target customer, who, the statement of need, the product is a product category, that, and then list the key product benefit, unlike your competitor, and finally our product and what makes your product different. So an example of that filled in is this one. So let's pretend we're working for a company that wants to create a hotel booking app. We might decide that this is our product strategy. So our product strategy is that we are for traveling business professionals who still need to meet face-to-face to maintain high-value relationships and secure sales. The Pro Hotel Finder is a members-only booking platform working with select premium hotels in major destinations that promises a flawless hotel experience, comfort and convenience exceeding expectations from when you arrive to when you leave. Unlike our competitor, the Hotel Finder, our product offers a premium hotel booking and stay experience with emphasis on convenience and delightful customer service. So that's just an example of what a product strategy could be. And now that we've got our product strategy, now we will move on to the next planning meeting, which is the product roadmap. So in the roadmap meeting, ultimately, we're taking that product strategy, that goal for our product, and we're now wanting to create a kind of loose time frame of how we will achieve it. How will we achieve it over the next, for example, 1 or 2 years? And we want our product roadmap to be very high level, and it should be a high level view of the requirements and the priorities. And as I said, a loose time frame of how we will complete it over the kind of foreseeable future. So Jeff Gothelf, author of Lean UX, summarizes quite nicely what is one of the challenges when it comes to product roadmaps in Agile product development. And he says, one of the biggest challenges in product management is planning the work in a linear, visual way. Digital product development is not linear. It is iterative. We build some things, we ship them, we see how they impact customer behavior, we iterate them, and we ship them again. So as you can see, it's hard to plan a roadmap for something that's always evolving, for something that can change, from day to day. So how do we create a product roadmap with this in mind while still allowing it to be agile? So first, we set our product roadmap planning meeting, and we want to arrive to this meeting having talked to our users. So we should have talked to our users. We should have identified some user needs, problems, and any areas for improvements with our product. Once we've got this and discussed this with the team, we can then start creating themes. And themes are what we put on our roadmap. So we can see what we're planning on achieving over the next kind of year or two. So the themes on our roadmap should speak in outcomes, not features. So what are outcomes? Outcomes are measurable behavior changes in our users' lives that we want to achieve their product, whereas features are merely the ways that we reach that outcome. So if we take that hotel booking app example that we looked at earlier, let's say we discovered that new users to our app tend to take up to 7 app visits before they make a purchase. So an outcome for a change in the user behavior that we could want to achieve could be that customers complete their first purchase in less app visits. So this theme, this outcome, this change in user behavior can be something that we put on our roadmap that we want to achieve, for example, within the first 3 months. And the benefit of this, of having themes as outcomes, is that it gives us the flexibility to be able to switch features in and out of the theme, so it can constantly be evolving without significantly affecting the roadmap. So if we look at that hotel app example, there's a number of features we could build that could encourage users to make their first purchase. We could have a live chat bot, because users feel that they have some questions and they'd like to talk it through before they make their first purchase. Or we could set up an automatic email campaign to offer incentives to users visiting our app. So yeah, there's a number of features we could do to help us achieve that behavior. And that's why we keep that behavior as the plotted points on our roadmap, to give us that flexibility and that agility. Once we've chosen our themes, the next step is to choose our success metrics for our themes. Because as the saying goes, you can't improve what you don't measure. So by assigning metrics and KPIs to our themes, that means that as time goes on, we can assess the quality of our product and also track our team performance. So obviously, the metrics that you use will depend a lot on your product and your business goals. But pretty common metrics are, for example, customer engagement, conversion rates, and customer churn. However, take care when you're assigning metrics. You don't want to just assign one metric to the point that you're ignoring lots and lots of other things that you could be improving. But similarly, you don't want to be measuring so many metrics that your team's focus becomes scattered and it kind of becomes hard to achieve anything. So now that we've got our themes and we've got our metrics, we can now start to include epics under our themes. So epics are basically just bodies of work that will help us serve the theme, that will help us reach that change in user behavior. And within each epic, we will have the relevant features that we want to build and user stories, more on those later, that will help us complete that epic. So there's often a discussion in Agile circles about the difference between epics and themes. So a theme is typically a grouping of similar epics, but whatever your definition, at this stage, it's important that we keep our themes high level. So at this point in the meeting, we should have our themes ready to go. And now we want to prioritize them. We've probably come up with a lot of things that we want to address, a lot of things that we want to change and build. But obviously, we have limited resources, we have limited time, and we can't tackle everything at once. So what we need to do is decide what are the most important things, and then we can focus on building those first. So we should do this by reflecting on our KPIs, our product strategy, and the resources that we have available. And with that in mind, we can start ranking our themes. So there's many prioritization frameworks available. The one I'm sharing on the left here is called the Impact Effort Prioritization Matrix. It's a fairly common one. And what you do is you rank your themes based on how much effort you think they will take, high or low effort, and also how much impact you think it will have on the business, high or low. And once you've plotted all your themes on this matrix, it should be fairly easy to see which ones are not worth your time, for example, things that are high effort and low impact, and which ones are kind of no-brainers, easy to prioritize features that would be, for example, low effort and high impact. So this is just one of the ways that you can prioritize your themes. But as I say, there are lots, and you can use whatever works best for you and your team. And finally, we want to iterate. So just like the products that you're creating as an Agile team, which are iterative, your roadmap is also iterative. You should be, reflecting on your roadmap, updating it, making changes where it makes sense, just so that, your roadmap too should be a living artifact that is flexible and can adapt to changing market conditions and changing feedback. So the benefits of using this product roadmap is, one, that your team can refer to it and they can use it to make better product decisions on the day-to-day basis. And two, your executives who aren't in your day-to-day meetings have something they can look at to get visibility on the project and understand what's coming up next. And that's really, a strong benefit of the product roadmap. That it's a communication tool that works for your team and your stakeholders so that everyone's kind of on board with where the product development is going. So we've now got our product roadmap defined, but as I said, it's a pretty high-level document. So if we want to start getting into more detailed and tactical plans, we need to start moving to the product backlog. So with our product backlog, we take those themes that we've defined in the product roadmap and we start breaking them down into a sort of to-do list. You can think of the product backlog as a to-do list for your development team. So this is where you'll keep a kind of list of all the features, changes to existing features, bug fixes, infrastructure changes, anything else that you think your team should do in order to achieve the goals in your roadmap. So if it's not in the product backlog, your development team doesn't work on it, basically. So it needs to be in the backlog in order for your team to be able to work on it. However, just because something is in your backlog, so just because a feature is in your backlog, does not mean that the development team is committed to building it. Backlog, just like anything else in Agile, is flexible. So your product owner or the backlog, the person who's looking after the backlog, should be able to quickly add or remove items from this product backlog as makes sense. So maybe at the start of the project, one feature seemed like a really good idea, so it was put into the product backlog to build. But as the months go on and there's more user feedback, more market research, you're realizing that this product is going to be pretty low impact. So you can remove that from your backlog. There's no commitment to build that, and you can replace it with something that you now think would be a better feature to have. So in the product backlog, there's lots of different types of items, but user stories are the most common items in the product backlog. So what are user stories? User stories are basically simple, short little stories that describe something that would give your user value. And the most common template is the as a, and you put your user's role, I want, and you put your user's goal, so that, and you share your user's benefit. So an example could be if we were making some sort of accounting app, for example, that as a self-employed professional, I want to be able to easily view my monthly profit so that I can be aware of how much income I have. So that can be an example of, you've got your user identified, you know something they want, and you also know, importantly, the value they're getting from it or the benefit they're getting from it. Also, some businesses like to use user personas. This is just a way of kind of making the user stories feel more real. So you might say that in this user story, the self-employed professional is called Emma, who's a 27-year-old self-employed electrician. So user stories can be written by anyone in the team at any time. and added to the backlog by the backlog owner. So why are we doing these user stories? We're focusing on them because they help us fulfill this Agile principle, which is that one of our highest priorities is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software features. And in order to do this, in order to complete user stories, we only want to build what is absolutely necessary to deliver that value identified in the story to the user. So for example, instead of creating a database for the entire product, which you would maybe do in a more traditional product development system, you would maybe want to build the entire database first before you move on to anything else. Instead, we would look at the user story and we would only want to build that small chunk of the database that is absolutely needed to fulfill the user story, so the user will have this piece of software at the end that they can engage with. So if we look at this example on the right, the self-employed professional wants to be able to easily view their monthly profit so they can be aware of how much income they have. To fulfill this story, we would just build just enough of the database so that the user can then log in and see some sort of screen or page where they can see their monthly profit. And that's it. There's nothing extra being built to fulfill this user story. And this kind of building in small chunks might feel really unintuitive. And you're probably, as the project goes on, you'll have to go back to stuff that you've already worked on and rework things and update them. So yeah, this can feel really unintuitive, but I think it's important to remember that this is actually, as a whole, a more efficient way to build products. Because instead of waiting years to launch a product and then find out the market shifted, this way we're able to, at the end of our sprint, put a piece of software, some features in our users' hands and get that, A, give them value, which is good for the business, and B, we get that user feedback so we can see what's working and what's not working. And worst case scenario, if it's not a valuable feature, if our guess was wrong, it's okay because we've only lost, for example, 2 weeks on this instead of years by comparison. So this helps us minimize our failure risk. It means that we can adapt to the response and meet the changing market conditions.
Lucy,
Yeah.
one question. What do you want to make with the questions that we have at the chat? Do you want that we make now? We have one question. Do you want to make now or at the end of the session? What do you prefer?
Maybe at the end, or yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, whatever you prefer. It's fine.
Okay, we can do it at the end.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of a bad user story. It'd be good to look at things that don't work to understand what does work. So a bad user story could be, for example, as a developer, I want to build a database with all the tables to model the data so that I can store all the information the app needs. So why is this a bad user story? Well, one, it's not from the user perspective, it's from the developer perspective. And as a result, if we did build this, if we built the entire database, we're not giving usable software to the user, and we're not giving them anything that provides value to them. Because ultimately our end user, Emma, the self-employed electrician, doesn't really care if we have an entire database built because she can't interact with it or do anything with it that is of interest to her. And ultimately, this violates our Agile principles, which is that we should be aiming to satisfy the user through releasing usable software. But that's not to say that the idea is bad. Obviously, we do need to build a database. That is not a bad idea. We're just saying that the user's story is bad because it's not something that's giving value to our user. Another thing with user stories is we're trying to make them small little chunks that we can work on. So ideally, when we're making our user stories, we want them to take about 1 to 2 days of work for our development team in order to complete them. But we might find that we have stories that are quite large that would, take quite a long time to build. And in that case, we can split the user stories. So that's where we take one big story and we split them into several shorter stories of roughly around the same size. And when you're thinking about how much work it will take to complete a user story, remember that even if the feature itself is very small, for example, maybe it's just a checkout button or something like that, in order to fulfill that user story, you've got to do all the work from the back end to the front end, design everything that goes into delivering that feature. So don't forget to include that entire work process in when you're estimating how long it will take to fulfill a user story. So if we go back to this self-employed professional user story we saw earlier, I want to be able to easily view my monthly profit so I can be aware of how much income I have. So maybe we estimate that this will take us about 3 days. And as a result, we want to break it down into smaller chunks. So we could break it down into this story on the top right. That is, as a self-employed professional, I want to have a dashboard page so I can see my most important data as soon as I log in, which we think might take us 1 day just to build the page that the user can go to. And then we might break it down into another user story where I want to see the monthly income and expenses chart on this page so that I can quickly see my expected profit. So we've broken it down into kind of 2 smaller chunks. And the benefit of this, of using user stories, is that now we know that the features that we're building or can provide value to our users. And by making these small stories, we're able to quickly get that usable features into our users' hands and gather feedback, which will help us when it comes to future iterations and to adapting quickly. By keeping these stories small, it gives us a lot of flexibility and gives us the adaptability to quickly react to change. And we're able to continuously deliver value and usable software features for our user. Okay, so we're almost ready to start the sprint. We've got our product strategy, we've got our product roadmap. That's how we see the project going over the kind of next year or two. We've got our product backlog, which is the big to-do list of everything that we think we need to build so far, and our user stories. Now we're coming to the sprint planning meeting. This is where we're planning the next sprint. So a sprint typically lasts 2 weeks. And it's that quick cycle of just planning, just enough, a few features, developing and building them so that we can have that incremental release, that piece of software that we give to our users. So we want to have the sprint planning meeting before the start of each sprint. And our goal is to create the sprint backlog. So this is where we take the big to-do list in the product backlog and we start choosing which items we want to work on over this 2-week sprint, which items we think we want to deliver over this 2-week sprint. And in the sprint planning meeting, we should have our development team who will be working on it. And as we said, they're self-organizing, so they should be able to choose what they think they can handle and what they want to deliver in that sprint, and also the product owner. So when you're deciding what you want to pull into your sprint backlog, obviously you'll want to, do the stories that give the most value to the user and the most value to the business first. But again, you've got this fixed time frame. You've got 2 weeks. You've got a limited team size, so you can't build everything at once. So once again, you're having to prioritize what you focus on first. And again, there's a number of prioritization methods available. One very simple way is you could just estimate with your team how many days you think a story will take to complete or a feature will take to ship. Or you can use the story points prioritization method. With this method, at the sprint planning meeting, your team will discuss the stories and they will vote together to allocate a story with points. And the points relate to how much effort, not necessarily time, but effort, the story will take. Then, with all that in mind, the team can decide which stories they think they can complete within the sprint timeframe, the 2 weeks. So let's say the team decides that they feel like their capacity for the sprint is 9. That's the amount of effort, the amount that they can do in that time frame. So as a result, they could take maybe 3 3-point stories, or a 5-story and 2 2-point stories. So they're picking the stories that they think match their capacity of what they can deliver in 2 weeks. And it's important that it's the development team that's choosing their capacity and agreeing on what they're working on. Because as we said, one of our Agile principles is that the development teams should be self-organizing. In this meeting, we might also find some of the user stories from our sprint backlog. We'll need to have extra details added. We might need to break them down into technical tasks, just so the development team know what they're working with and kind of have a nice checklist. So with sprint prioritization, there's a lot of guesstimating going on. And estimation is hard. It's not a perfect science. So more likely than not, especially if you're new to Agile or at the beginning of a project, you might find that your estimates are wildly wrong. You might underestimate yourself, you might massively overestimate yourself. But that's fine. The key with Agile is that you learn from your past experiences, you kind of reflect on your past experiences, and you adapt going forward. So you'll likely find that as the team continues, you'll get a better idea of your capacity, and you'll get a better idea of how long or how much effort certain stories or features will take you. Also, when we're in our sprint planning meeting, this is a good time to revisit our definition of done with the team. This is where we agree what we think the software will look like at the end of the sprint and when we can actually classify it as done. Okay, now we've moved into, we've got all the planning meetings out of the way. Now we've moved into the actual sprint. So we're in the 2-week cycle. And during the sprint, we will have our daily meeting. So under the Scrum methodology, this is commonly known as a stand-up. And this is just a quick check-in point meeting, just to make sure, so the team's communicating with each other and there's no kind of roadblocks getting in the way of everyone's work for the day. So it's a super quick 10 to 15-minute meeting. And you really want to ask members of your team these 3 things. What did you complete yesterday? What are you working on today? And are there any roadblocks getting in the way? So these quick meetings are really essential for the communication that drives Agile product management, because Agile itself depends on being able to react quickly to issues. So by able to voice them to the entire team in these stand-ups, it's a powerful way to foster cross-team collaboration. And finally, at the end of the 2-week sprint, we will have our review and retrospective. So the end of the sprint, hopefully we've shipped some functioning software. It's a huge milestone. It's always kind of a cause for celebration. And at the review and retrospective, we just want to reflect on the work we did in the sprint and then see how we can move forward. So this meeting should probably only take 1 to 2 hours max, but obviously it depends on your team. And the goal of these meetings are to review what we did in the sprint, if we managed to meet our goals or not. And if not, are there things we need to change? Remember, we always need to be reflecting and adapting. This can also be a good time to identify any changes or bugs that we could add to our product backlog that we think we might need to work on in the future. And as I say, yes, it's always a really good time to reflect and think about how the team could adjust to improve for the next sprint. And ta-da, we've done it. So we've just reached the end of our first sprint. And now we can rinse and repeat. So we've finished the end of our sprint. And now our job is to go back to the beginning. Well, not completely back to the beginning, but back to the sprint planning meeting and start planning the next sprint. And then continue in those 2-week cycles of launching, planning, and going through the sprints. And as I say, we continue going through the sprint until the product is complete. So that is a kind of general guide to an Agile product development journey. I hope from listening to this talk that if someone asks you what is Agile, that you'll be able to tell them that it's making product decisions in a way that follows the 12 Agile Principles, regardless of whatever methodology you choose. And I hope that if you and your team decide to follow Agile product development, that you too would have a 3 times greater chance of success when compared to traditional waterfall methods. So thank you everyone for coming. Yeah, and I guess we'll move on to the questions now.
Yep. We have 2 questions for now. One from Elias. Elias asked about how can the develop team measure what easily means in this user history? Should we try to use non-vague terms?
One second, I'm trying to stop sharing my screen. Am I still sharing?
Yeah, you are sharing.
Okay, 1 second. Let's see if I can stop. Oh, there we go, pause share. Okay. And let me see if I can see the chat. Okay, perfect. I can see the chat. So sorry, could you repeat that question, please, Elena?
Yeah, the question comes from Elias, and Elias said, how can we develop team measure what easily means in this user history? Maybe if you need some clarification about the questions, Elias could give us these clarifications.
I'll
try to explain myself. The thing is that sometimes the user stories come with some back terms, like, for example, I think in that user story says something about having an easy way to have the dashboard, or maybe an export. Not really sure, but this kind of thing, like easily or thing like this, in sometimes could be a headache for the development team, because we don't know what exactly it means easily.
Okay. Just to check I understand, you mean sometimes user stories aren't clear for the developers? Is that okay? And so how can you make sure that the user stories are clear for the development team? Is that the question?
That is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that can be a big problem, especially if it's not developers that are making the user stories, if it's coming from the UX or from the product owner, and maybe they're not thinking about it necessarily from the developer point of view. So in that case, if the developer isn't involved in making the user story, you could do something like have a kind of a 3 amigos, or like a very small meeting, maybe. So the developer, whoever wrote the user story, maybe the UX person, the product owner, and anyone else that's a relevant stakeholder or has insight to that user story. And you could just have a quick 15-minute meeting to clarify the points. You know, you can bring your perspective as a developer, you know, what's this, and this. And as a team, you can maybe together edit that user story and hopefully make it into something that is usable. So yeah, so ultimately, I think the answer is that if something's not clear, there should be some quick collaboration to make it clear.
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add something? I don't know if other people, we can jump and say things.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Also, user stories, by the proper definition, are deliberately vague, because one of the main practice of the user stories is the CCC. So it's the car conversation confirmation. So when the user story is explained in a way as that type of user, I want to achieve X because Y, is to have the conversation between the whole team members to clarify what are the details. The details need to be clear, but enough open to being negotiable if we follow the invest pattern in the user stories, so we can adapt what we really need, what is really needed in the story, and what is not that needed, that is more optional. So that's why through that conversation between the business people, the product owner, and the team, and the QA, and everyone there, so all the members of the team, then you arrive to what are these kind of details through the acceptance criteria. That is the confirmation. That is what you include also in the user stories. It's my opinion. I mean, if any other want to jump and say anything, feel free.
Yep, feel free.
Yeah, Fran, at the chat we have another question. Maybe you could take a look.
Yeah, sure. We have another question from Pablo that says, what's your opinion about limiting the backlog size or having a TTL, time to live, for items there? So I guess that is an expiration time for the items in the backlog, or to limit the items in the backlog.
Okay. I can go, and then Fran, if you want to jump in, that's cool. To me, I think the backlog kind of quite often kind of get out of control, because there's always cool features you can build. There's always things you can fix and improve, and it can become quite, large. And I think this is really, it really comes down to good backlog grooming, which is normally the responsibility of the product owner in the team. And they're just sort of constantly wanting to go through the product backlog and reprioritize, because there's lots and lots of things we could build, but maybe as time goes on, some of them are less realistic. We realize we just don't have the resources. They're not going to provide that much value. So we're constantly grooming or kind of analyzing our backlog, and getting rid of things that aren't realistic for whatever reason, or we just know they're not going to happen, or we're not going to have time for them because we need to prioritize other things. So the product owner should be constantly reviewing and editing the backlog as needed. Fran, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, yeah. Now that you ask, I will say that more than half a backlog size, I like more to have kind of a not really an expiration date on the story, but something that reflect me that there's for too long in the backlog. Remember that also, when we have the backlog and we are doing a refinement in the user stories, if we do the refinement and then the story take too long to being picked up by the team, probably is obsolete and need another refinement, because the market is changing, or the needs are changing. So maintaining a good backlog is kind of an art, and you need to not have a really big thing, but big enough to have a goal, or to have a direction where is going the product. But also you need to remove things that are being there for so long, and that never will happen. So have something like a time to leave, an expiration date, or something that remark you that is being for so long. I think that is a good idea, not to have as a rule, but at least as an indicator.
Cool. Thanks, Fran. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to share, or maybe responses to some of the questions we just talked about? Maybe if you have a different viewpoint. Oh, sorry, Lawrence. I didn't see you had the hand there.
Sure, I wasn't sure how we were doing this. Anyone that knows me knows that I kind of almost always want to jump in and like offer an opinion as well. And I great talk, by the way. I really enjoyed that. I think one thing that's worth kind of remembering is the idea that teams should kind of govern themselves. So I think with work in progress limits and all of these things, it's like whatever works for the team. I've certainly been in teams where we've kind of like gone, look, we really need to do something about this work in progress. It's too much. So we introduce a limit, and then at retro, you're kind of like, oh, right, is that working? Is it not working? And you can kind of tweak it, no decision has to be set in stone. You kind of try something if the team are prepared to commit and give it a go. And one of the major ceremonies is the retro, so there's always going to be an opportunity to kind of refine further.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts?
I'm pretty sure that there's more experience related with what you have described, and any experience that you want to put on the table and bring different point of views, like this approach, I like it, or I didn't work in my team, is welcome, because with the conversation is how we grow as community. So feel free to just jump.
I can't resist. I want to jump in again.
Sorry,
Go for it.
Lawrence,
Yeah.
you could talk more high, please, because you have a lot of sound in the pub. Maybe
Oh.
it's the TV or something like that. And if you could talk more high, please.
Okay, cool. Just speak a bit louder. Yeah, cool. I was just going to share one thing that's worked really well for me is example mapping, I think it's called. And this is quite new for me. So in terms of like, how do you avoid like, it should be easy to do this, you know, how do you kind of pin down those details? And one really good way is to kind of run different examples. So you kind of ask a question. I'm not going to go into loads of detail because I don't know how bad the background noise is, and I feel slightly uncomfortable joining an agile discussion in a pub. But example mapping is a great subject if you want to Google it and get some more information. It's really simple to do, and I think it works really well. Keeps things very human.
Yeah, it's Pablo here. Wondering, Lawrence, if you're talking about specification by example as a way of kind of defining, for example, that backlog that Elias was asking about, or any more details on a story?
Yeah, I'll dig out a link and I'll share it to kind of exactly what I'm talking about. But it's kind of it's a bit like testing the boundaries in a way. You come up with examples that demonstrate like what would happen in this example, what happened in that example. So you kind of you run with that, like we have this user who has a personality and they want a thing, and you kind of test the boundaries of kind of like how that thing would behave under different specific examples. I'll find a quick link and I'll share it.
Cool, cheers.
Cool. Thanks, Lawrence.
We have another thanks, Lawrence. We have another question in the chat to say, when do you recommend to have refinement sessions? It's coming from Sergi de Castro, sorry.
Cool. So this might depend on kind of your team, but I think for me, what seems to have worked best is to have the refinement sessions. Let's, you know, if we're doing like sort of a 2-week sprint, to have the refinement sessions maybe a few days before the end of the sprint, maybe sort of 4 days before the end or something like that. So you can start, you can start preparing things for the next sprint. Start identifying things that are going, you know, might need more work, and then you've got a little bit of leeway if you know you need more refinement or you know something needs a bit more clarification or research. That's just my opinion. I don't know, Fran or Lawrence, if you have other opinions, or anyone else.
I'm just going to also show a different model. So this is Lucy. The model that Lucy has presented is to have a proper schedule that day, or based on the length of the iteration, you have a regular cadence to do that sessions. This is something that works really well because it gives you the cadence, and you know when things are happening. But sometimes that forces you to go to a meeting that maybe there's not that much to discuss, and you have the time slot, or maybe there's not enough time to doing it. So other way to doing it is in a more reactive way. I've worked with teams that we just do the refinement in the moment that the product owner has something to refine, and just directly after the daily. It was a way to, instead of have a big 1-hour session or 1 hour and a half, to have like a quick refinement of 15 minutes in the moment that something is ready after the daily. And this also work pretty fine for teams that are reactive, and just as a way to show that there's different approach to that. It doesn't need to be always to have a cadence. It's just try what worked in your team.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Fran. Like, yeah, as always, Agile should be reactive, adapting. You know, there's not one true way. It's whatever works for your team. So yeah, that's a good point, that there's multiple ways that you can achieve those things. Cool.
Do we have any other questions? If not, I think that it's just time to close, and thank you everyone for being here, and especially Lucy for the amount of knowledge that you have shared with us. And see you in the next Agile Sur meetup. So thank you for coming, and you will have the recording soon in the website.
Yes. Yes, thanks everyone for coming. I really enjoyed giving the talk, and thanks for your feedback, and hope to see you in other events. It'll be really nice.
Thank you, Lucy.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.